having traveled and lived and worked all over the world, that this is the only nation in the world in which a young woman could start out in the middle of a deep recession, typing and filing and answering the phones for a little 9-person real estate firm, go on and become eventually the chief executive of the largest technology company in the world, and run for the presidency of the United States. That's only possible in the United States of America. And it's worth thinking about why. As we face both a pivotal time in our nation's history and also, frankly, perilous times for our nation, it's worth asking, why is my story? Why is your story? Why have all our stories only been possible here? Because in truth, people all over the world have lots of talent and gifts and ambition and potential, and yet more things have been more possible for more people from more places here than anywhere else. And I think it's because our nation was founded on what at the time was a very radical idea and what is a visionary idea still. When I was a little girl, my mother said to me, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." And I've learned over and over again that all people have God-given gifts, regardless of their circumstances. I think our founders knew that too. And so they founded a nation on the idea that here you had the right to fulfill your potential. It's what they meant when they said the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And here is the radical part. They said that right to fulfill your potential comes from God and should not be taken away by man or government. And so, this is an extraordinary place because so many people have had the opportunity to find and use their God-given gifts and fulfill their potential. I think we are at a pivotal point in our nation's history. I think we have come to a place where the potential of this nation, the potential of too many people in this nation, is being crushed by the weight, the power, the cost, the complexity, the ineptitude, and the creeping corruption of the federal government of this nation. We have the potential in this, the 21st century, we have the potential to feed the world. But on August 28th, the Environmental Protection Agency is going to control 96% of the water in the state of Iowa. I met a farmer yesterday. I've told this story all day long because this man's story impacted me so deeply. I met a gentleman yesterday named Colin. He and his brother are in the poultry business. Their family has been in the poultry business for generations. And of course, as you well know, avian flu came to Iowa. As he watched his birds sicken, he knew what he needed to do. He knew he needed to euthanize those birds that were ill as quickly as possible, and that he needed to appropriately dispose of their bodies. But he could not do so, because the federal government told him, no, we have a plan. We have a plan that sat on the shelf for the last 10 years, and we know what you should do. And so instead of doing what needs to be done, we need you to wait until we get around to coming out and euthanizing your birds the way we want to. And so for weeks, he watched as his birds sickened and died as the feed trucks came in and out of his poultry producing property and carried what? An airborne avian flu out with them. And then when it finally came died, imagine just for a moment, imagine how you would feel if all around you and your family, in a business you had been in all your life, if all around you your birds were dead and dying. Imagine the stench. Imagine how depressing that is, and you know what to do, and you can't do it. Imagine how that would feel. And finally, he told me, 6 bureaucrats showed up from Washington, D.C. They were in their 30s. There's nothing wrong with being in your 30s, but they didn't know anything about the poultry business. and they told him what to do. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of the power, the cost, the complexity, the ineptitude of the federal government that is crushing the potential of this nation. We have the potential to feed the world. We have the potential to power the world. We could be the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century. We have everything we need to do that, except that the same Environmental Protection Agency that is now going to control the water in the state of Iowa has decided that it doesn't much like coal. That it's going to make it as hard as possible for fracking to happen, that they're going to stand in the way of natural gas exports and keystone pipelines, and so I've been as well to communities in Kentucky and West Virginia where people's livelihoods and lives are being destroyed at the altar of somebody else's ideology. You know, a woman that I greatly admire, Margaret Thatcher, once said this. She said, "I am unwilling to manage the decline of a great nation." Well, I'm unwilling to manage the decline of a great nation as well. And I will tell you that we have a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who have just let these festering problems go on and on. Did you know that 80% of the American people, maybe you're among them, I sure am, 80% of the American people now believe we have a professional political class in Washington, D.C. that is more focused. They're more focused on the preservation of their power, their title, and their position than they are on getting anything done. And the truth is, under both Republicans and Democrats alike, we've had problems that have been around a long time. How long has the border been insecure? 25 years? How long has the Veterans Administration been a stain on our nation's honor? 2 decades? How long has every government agency been getting bigger and bigger and more powerful and more inept? About 50 years? You see, there are a lot of people in politics who are managers. They do the best they can within the existing system. But that is not what leaders do. Leaders challenge the system. Leaders challenge the status quo. And so I am not content to manage the decline of a great nation, but I am prepared, with your help, and the citizens of this great nation, to lead the resurgence of a great nation. So before I take your questions, let me just say that it is important in 2016 that we win the presidency of the United States. A lady asked me to reprise a question that I was asked. You know, I've gained something of a reputation for answering every question that I'm asked. You know, I'll go anywhere and talk to anybody. And one Saturday morning, I was asked this question on a national television show. The question was, did I think a woman's hormones prevented her from serving in the Oval Office? Oh my gosh. So ladies, here's the test. Can any of you think of a single instance in which a man's judgment was clouded by his hormones? Never. Including in the White House. Look, Mrs. Clinton cannot be president of the United States, but not because she's a woman. She cannot be president of the United States because she's not trustworthy. An investigation is being launched today into her emails from her private device. She doesn't have a track record of leadership. I asked at a CPAC speech in February, I asked a very simple question. Mrs. Clinton, please name an accomplishment. She hasn't yet. And while she's held big fancy titles, leadership isn't about titles. Leadership is about getting things done. And she hasn't done that. And finally, the policy she's going to pursue from the left wing of her party will further crush the potential of this nation. Now go ahead, you may not have decided who you're going to caucus for. And I hope very much that at the end of today you'll decide to caucus for me, but go ahead and admit it. You would love to see me debate Hillary Clinton. Because you know that I could win that fight. But once we win, then we need somebody who can do the job. So to do the job, think about it. What do we need? I think we need somebody who actually understands how the economy works in order to get it going and growing again. Somebody who understands that crony capitalism is alive and well, and the engine of economic growth in this nation has always been small businesses, community-based businesses, family-owned businesses, and those are getting crushed. Indeed, we're destroying more than we're creating now for the first time in U.S. history. We need somebody who understands the world and how it works and who's in it. I know more world leaders on stage today than anyone running, with the possible exception of Hillary Clinton, only I didn't do photo ops. I had a meeting with Vladimir Putin this close, or with King Abdullah of Jordan, or with Bibi Netanyahu. adversaries press forward. And I also know that we must have the strongest military on the face of the planet, and everybody has to know it. And that means caring for those who serve us and caring as well for those who have already served. We need a leader who understands bureaucracies and how to move them, because the government is one giant bloated bureaucracy. And there are some very basic things that have to get done to get that bureaucracy under control. Let's start with knowing where our money is being spent. And instead of just arguing over the rate of increase over last year's budget, which is how every federal government agency gets bigger and bigger, that we actually ask every agency, require every agency to justify every dollar of every program every year. Go to some version of zero-based budgeting. We actually need to have consequences for bad performance. So when you can watch pornography all day long in a federal government job and earn the same pay, pension, and benefits as somebody trying to do a good job, that's unacceptable. We need to change that. We need somebody who understands technology, because technology is a weapon that is being used against us. It is defining this century, but it's also a very powerful tool that can be used to change the direction of bureaucracies and also to re-engage citizens in the process of their government. And I hope you'll ask me in Q&A how specifically I would do that. Finally, and most importantly of all, I think we need somebody who understands what leadership is. Leadership is not about going along to get along. Leadership is not about the acquisition of power or title or position or a big office or a big airplane. Leaders challenge the status quo. They do not accept what has been broken just because it's been that way for a really long time. But the highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others. And we need a leader now in the White House who will work with the citizens of this great nation to unlock our considerable potential for this, the 21st century. So as I go out and I talk to Iowans every day, I think about Colin, or I think about all the people that I meet every single day. I think about my own daughter. We lost one to the demons of addiction, but our surviving daughter, and I think about my two granddaughters. I think about what this nation must be. And in my mind, I see Lady Liberty and Lady Justice. Picture Lady Liberty. She stands tall and strong. She is clear-eyed. She is resolute. She doesn't shield her eyes from the realities of the world. She faces out into the world, which is the way America must always face. And she holds her torch high, because she knows she is a beacon of hope in a very troubled and tragic world. And Lady Justice holds a sword, because she's a fighter. She's a warrior. For the values and the principles that have made this nation great, she holds a scale. And with that scale, she is reminding us that all of us are equal in the eyes of God. And so all of us must be equal as well in the eyes of the law and government, powerful and powerless alike. And she wears a blindfold. With that blindfold, I think she says to us that it must be true, it can be true, that in this nation, in this century, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter how you start. It doesn't matter what your circumstances. Here, every American's life must be filled with the possibilities that come from their God-given gifts, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, sir.
In your first couple of days of office, what are you going to do to address these problems?
Okay, great question. So let me start with foreign policy just for a moment, because we have to reset how our allies and our adversaries think about us. Not with the gimmicky red reset button, with real action. So I would make 2 phone calls on day 1. The first would be to my good friend Bibi Netanyahu, to reassure him that this nation will stand with the state of Israel. And while that phone call is important in and of itself, the truth is every ally we have around the world, whether they agree with Israel or not, they're all watching how we treat Israel. And their conclusion right now is, wow, the United United States of America is treating Israel, their friend, this way, what is my friendship with the Americans worth? The second phone call I would make would be to the supreme leader of Iran. I think realistically he might not take the phone call. But he would get the message. And the message is this: I don't care what the deal is that President Obama signed. I don't care what deal you have with the Chinese, the Russians, the UN, or the Europeans. New deal. Until you really allow anytime, anywhere inspections of every military facility and every nuclear facility, we will make it as difficult as possible for you to move money around the global financial system. We can do that. We can cut off their access to the global payment system called SWIFT. We don't need anyone's permission to do it, and they would get the message. And every other adversary would get a message as well. The United States is back in the leadership business. Second, I would start talking to the American people immediately about what we need to do to reform this government that has become so costly, inept, and corrupt. So, every one of you have a smartphone, I think. Here's a little practice session, okay? Pretend that I'm in the Oval Office, and you're listening to me on a radio address, or maybe you're watching me on television. I'm going to ask you to take out your smartphones, and I'm going to engage you in the process of government to put pressure on the politicians on Capitol Hill. I'm going to ask you some basic questions. Fellow citizens, do you think it would be a good idea to actually know how your money is being spent and to have a zero-based budgeting process? Please press 1 for yes, 2 for no. This technology exists, ladies and gentlemen. We use it all the time. We use it to vote on The Voice and a bunch of other things that don't really matter. Why don't we use it to vote on things that really do matter? I might ask the question, remember that bill, ladies and gentlemen, that Congress passed a year ago that said we could fire the top 400 senior executives of the VA if they didn't do their jobs? Do you think this is a good idea all throughout government? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. By the way, you know people would vote. You know how they would answer. I don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans. Everybody's going to say yes to this. And the reason I asked the question is because this was intended to be a citizen government. We do have the technology to know what citizens want, and it puts pressure on the political process. Third, immediately, I would start rolling back a whole set of things that have been done that are crushing this economy, rolling back these EPA regulations. You know who put these regulations in place? Who are these EPA regulators? They're unaccountable, they're unelected, they're nameless, faceless bureaucrats who have decided they can control 96% of the water in the state of Iowa. Really? Let's roll that back. Let's roll back the 400 pages of regulation that got saddled onto the internet by, once again, 3 unaccountable, unelected commissioners who are pursuing their ideology. Let's roll back a whole set of things. And then, finally, let's start talking with the American people, as well as with your elected representatives, about finally solving some festering problems. Let's move money and men and material to the border and secure it, finally. Let's actually follow laws, whether it's in sanctuary cities or around weapons. Let's follow the laws we put in place in this nation. So those are the things I'd start with. And then we'd really get on a roll.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Our current tax code has nearly 75,000 pages. Okay, as small business owners, they're looking for a candidate who understands we need a simpler, fairer tax that levels the playing field with foreign countries.
Yep.
What is your plan?
Okay. So the question was, our tax code is almost 75,000 pages now. That's a fact. Small business owners are getting crushed by this level of complexity. They can't even understand it. And oh, by the way, our tax code taxes people unfairly based compared to foreign countries. Right. So, 70,000 page tax code. Folks, let me just ask you a question. How long have you been hearing about bipartisan tax reform? Like a long time, right? How often do new plans come out of politicians running for president and say, well, I'm going to fix the tax code? Has it ever happened yet? No, it hasn't. And you know one of the reasons it hasn't happened yet is because sometimes people know more about talking than they do about doing. So here's my plan. 70,000 pages has to get to about 3. Why is 3 important? Yes, we have to lower every rate. Yes, we have to have a competitive tax rate. It's ridiculous. If we want businesses to grow in the United States, we can't have the highest business tax rate in the world, which is what we do. But the reason it has to go from 75,000 to 3 is because, and people know this in their bones, if something is so complicated you can't understand it, you're getting taken advantage of. And the only way to level the playing field is to simplify. Complexity favors the big. Complexity favors the powerful. Complexity favors the wealthy and the well-connected. Because only the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected can hire all those people necessary to figure out what the heck is in those 75,000 pages. So we got to simplify it. My belief as to how to simplify it: lower every rate, close every loophole. Now there may be one or two loopholes that we think are really important. But the problem is, every time we start talking about bipartisan tax reform, we don't ever start from scratch. We kind of tinker around with the 75,000 pages that are already there, and we end up with something even more complicated than what we started with. So, you're welcome. Yes, sir. And then I'll come to you.
Yes, assuming that you could get on the stage in this first debate and...
Well, don't you want to see me there, really?
Yeah.
Really?
So the question is, what can we do to help you get on that stage, assuming that when you go to Washington, you'll be a problem solver and work with all parties and get things done?
Yeah. Well, that's the only way you get things done, is to work with everybody. And, you know, it's interesting. I have people come, I know you're with No Labels and you're trying to solve problems. I'm trying to solve problems too. It's interesting, when you think about that statistic I mentioned, 80% of the American people think we have a professional political class. What does that mean? Democrats and Republicans, young and old, every ethnicity. That's a huge majority of the American people. I am willing to bet that virtually everything I talked about since I've shown up here today, most everybody would agree with. In fact, I have Democrats come up to me all the time: I agree with you. Independents, I agree with you. Nothing that I've said is particularly partisan. It happens to be pretty common sense. We got to get some of these things fixed. So, I'm going to keep focusing on what we all know is true, what we know needs to be done. And I think I can be an effective problem
Is
solver.
there any way we can help change the rules and get you on that first stage?
Well, you know, the rules keep changing. And the circumstances keep changing too. You know, who would have guessed that we'd be going through what we're going through right now? I'll just leave it at that. The point is this. Here's what you can do to help me, because thank you. The rules of those debates are really focused on name ID. I mean, that's, when you look at national polls, it's about name ID more than anything else. And I started out in this campaign, I declared my candidacy on May 4th. The majority of the American people had never heard of me. I don't have years of donor lists. I don't have years of email lists. I haven't been a politician most of my life. So I started from sort of ground zero. The more you talk to the people you know, the more you help me. If you will advocate for me, and by the way, campaigns need fuel. So if you can give us $1 or $5, whatever you can give, if you can volunteer, if you can sign up, if you can advocate on my behalf, every single one of those things helps me. And I promise you, if you help me now and you caucus for me later, I will not falter. And I will just remind you, in this silly season of politics, which is what we're going through right now, at this same time, in several presidential elections in past years, the polls, the pundits, and the money said Jimmy Carter couldn't win, Ronald Reagan couldn't win, Bill Clinton couldn't win, and Barack Obama couldn't win. And every single one of those people became president of the United States, and it started right here in Iowa. Yes, sir? And then I'll take you, ma'am.
Well, I love the quote from your mother, but I know your dad was a tassler before he was a federal judge.
Ooh, you've done your homework.
I read the Weekly Standard, ma'am. And could you tell us a little bit about your dad's influence on you, and maybe tie it into the tax code? And Mrs. Clinton today proposed to raise capital gains rates. I don't know if you knew that.
Yes,
but-
I did know that. So, thank you for asking that question. The question was about my father. I literally learned conservatism at my father's knee. I would sit at night, because I adored my dad, and watch him watch the news. And he would yell at Walter Cronkite. And the next morning, I would get up and have breakfast and watch him read the New York Times and yell at the paper. And I would always say, Daddy, why are you reading the paper if it makes you so upset? I need to know what they're saying. My father was a tax lawyer. He loved the law. And tax law, boy, did that sound boring to me. But as I got older and wiser, I learned the reason he was a tax lawyer is because he knew the government's power to tax is the government's power to pick winners and losers, to decide who gets ahead and who falls behind. It is a use or abuse of power. Eventually, he would become a conservative judge on the very liberal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and I watched him stand true to his principles over and over and over. He usually wrote the dissenting opinion, and usually when the Supreme Court overturned the Ninth Circuit, the most frequently overturned circuit in the land, they would quote my father's opinions. He taught me conservatism, but I learned over the course of my life that our principles just work better. They work better to lift people up. They work better to grow anything. They work better to unlock potential in people, in companies, in nations. And one of the many things that I am truly grateful to my father for is when I'm asked the question, what kind of Supreme Court justices would I appoint? An incredibly important power that the president has to select their nominees to the Supreme Court. It's an easy answer for me. I would look for men and women like my dad, a strict constitutionalist who had the humility and the restraint to know that his job was not to decide what the law should be. His job was to decide what the law is. Yes, ma'am, you were next.
The National Center for Atmospheric Research has predicted that unless the carbon emissions are drastically reduced pretty soon, that by the middle of this century, most of the contiguous United States will have a 1930s-like drought, with the areas being much worse than that even. And so it is an urgent situation, and I wonder if you're willing to work with that. I know that you're concerned about the EPA, but I don't think the EPA is at the back of this.
Yes. Well, thank you for that question, and I don't know if anyone could hear it, but the fundamental question is about climate change and what we should do about it. As you pointed out, a 1930s-like drought. We had a drought in the 1930s, and presumably it wasn't greenhouse gas emissions, but I always ask people to read the fine print of the science. Because all of those scientists who tell us that global warming, climate change is real and man-made, if you read the fine print, and I have, also say this: a single nation acting alone can make no difference at all with current technology. So we can do many things in this country. We can wipe out the coal industry. We can control all of the water in the state of Iowa. We can do a whole set of things, and yet it won't make any difference at all. And so what we're doing actually is sacrificing other people's livelihoods at the altar of ideology, not science. Because people have decided, I don't like coal, but I like renewables. I don't really think the farmers know what to do with their water in Iowa, so I'm going to start taking away their responsibility to manage the land upon which their families depend responsibly. You know, the answer to every problem like this is what? Innovation. With the current technology we have, scientists tell us that it will take 30 years, trillions upon trillions of dollars, and a concerted, coordinated effort around the globe. Now, how likely do you suppose that is to happen right now? It's not. And so what we need is innovation. And the only way we can innovate is if we have leading industries that are profitable and healthy and growing enough that they can afford to innovate. So why would we destroy our coal industry? Why don't we let our coal industry invest and innovate in clean coal? Why are we investing and innovating in renewable fuels, but we're tilting the playing field? So, I think what we need to do is make sure that we become the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century, that we do so in as responsible a way as possible. But one of the benefits of becoming the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century is we will have an industry healthy enough to innovate and figure out how to solve some of these problems. Because we won't solve them no matter how many jobs we destroy in the United States of America. That's what scientists will tell us. Sorry, everybody. had a question before I come to you, sir. Was there someone back here? Yes, did you have your hand up before?
Yeah, I'm a retired Navy captain, so I would love to see a woman president in my lifetime.
Well, good for you, ma'am.
I do have a question though. Henry Ford, the great industrialist of his age, doubled his employees' salary so they could afford to buy the cars he was manufacturing, and later said we increased the buying power of our people and they increased the buying power of other people. In '68, when I graduated from high school, the minimum wage was $1.60. Today it would be at $10.97. What are you willing to do to restore the minimum wage to that level and protect it from inflation in the future?
Well, you know, that's a really great story to start with. Because guess who Henry Ford was? He wasn't the federal government, was he? He was a private sector guy who decided it was in his interest and the interest of employees and the interest of his market to do that. That's why Walmart did it. In other words, I actually think people who depend upon consumers being able to buy stuff usually do things that are in their self-interest. That's why free markets work. It's why free markets have lifted more people out of poverty around the world than any other system in human history. I would also commend to you the example of Puerto Rico. You know, Puerto Rico just declared bankruptcy. If you look at the data in Puerto Rico, what you'll find is Puerto Rico elevated their minimum wage way up above the national average. And what has been the consequence? Fewer jobs, more people leaving Puerto Rico, more people on programs of dependence, and now they're bankrupt. I understand why someone who's currently on a minimum wage wants to earn more. I really do. But I think we need to be clear about who most people on minimum wage are. They're people in entry-level jobs trying to move ahead. And when we make those entry-level jobs more expensive, there will be fewer of them. Hillary Clinton, we know this from the data. Hillary Clinton, in her speech, her economic speech, she made a point that she wanted to raise the minimum wage nationally, and then she talked about African-American youth unemployment. African-American youth unemployment is at record highs right now. And we know for a fact that when minimum wages are raised, African-American youth suffer. My own view is, if a state decides it's time to raise a minimum wage, for heaven's sakes, leave that to the states. Because the standard of living in Des Moines, Iowa is not the same as the standard of living in Manhattan, New York. So why should we do it nationally? I guess that's what I would say about the minimum wage. And the best assurance for raising people's income is a growing economy. And that is why we have to restore the engine of economic growth in this nation. And the engine of economic growth in this nation is and always has been small, family-owned, new, startup businesses. A little 9-person real estate firm I started in. Most people get their start the same way. Small businesses create 2/3 of the jobs, employ half the people. So when we are crushing the small and the big get bigger, everybody suffers. There aren't enough jobs and wages don't rise when economies aren't growing. And I believe you, sir, are the last question.
Oh, okay. I want to change the subject a little bit. I want to talk about the value of human life. There's Christians and other groups being persecuted all over the world, being killed or in the Middle East, beheaded, everything. Plus, we just heard what Planned Parenthood is doing. And they're ripping babies apart, selling their organs. If you get in there, what can you do to help the situation?
Well, I hope that you will look at, if you haven't already seen, the video that I released the day that second Planned Parenthood videotape came out. I stood with pro-life leaders and called it what it is, an abomination. I went on an interview with Jake Tapper. That's up on YouTube. You can go look at it. Carly Fiorina, Jake Tapper, Planned Parenthood. He wanted to talk about anything other than that videotape. What we saw in those tapes has nothing to do with whether you are pro-choice or pro-life. I am pro-life. But whether or not you agree with me, this has to do with the moral character of our nation. Imagine the hypocrisy of ideologues, extremists, who believe literally that it's not a life until it leaves the hospital. That is the Democrat Party platform, ladies and gentlemen, whether you realize or not. They talk about a woman's health, a woman's right to choose. Their party platform is this. It's not a life till it leaves the hospital. And the vast majority of Americans know that that is wrong. But imagine the hypocrisy of that group of people saying, you know what, we're not going to allow a woman to see an ultrasound of her unborn child before she makes a difficult decision to perhaps abort it. No, she doesn't need to see that picture. But we're going to use that same technology to make sure that we can harvest body parts. It's not a life, but somehow it's valuable enough to be used to save another life. That is about the character of this nation. And if a woman saw that ultrasound in any other setting besides Planned Parenthood, what would a doctor say to her? Not this is a specimen, not this is tissue, not these are samples. What would a doctor be saying? Look at your baby. Look at its heartbeat. Look at its little fingers and its little toes. This is the height of hypocrisy. So step number one, Planned Parenthood should be defunded. Why? Step number two, I urge every senator in the United States Senate to pass once and for all the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which protects an unborn child from 5 months on. The majority of women, the majority of young people, the majority of Americans now believe that abortion for any reason at all after 5 months is wrong. And then let's make sure, and I promise you, because I'm not afraid to talk about this subject, and I have spoken out more strongly than any other candidate, and I am not afraid to talk about this subject with Hillary Clinton either. Let's make sure that the American people understand how extreme the Democrat Party is. Let's make sure they understand that Hillary Clinton has lobbied over and over and over again against parental notification. So here's a fact, ladies and gentlemen. A 13-year-old girl needs her mother's permission to get a tattoo, to go to a tanning salon, but not to get an abortion. Really? That is not the kind of nation that I want to live in, and it's not the kind of nation you want to live in, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life. You know, this election is about many things. This election is about the future of our nation. This election is about leadership, whether that's what we really want or whether we're just going to kind of keep going on the same old path we've been on for too long. And I think this election is also about the fundamental difference between the conservative values that I grew up on and that I know work better to lift people up, and progressivism, which is what Hillary Clinton and everybody else running in the Democrat Party stands for. So I will close with one last story. I went on The View. You know, I'll go anywhere. I went on The View. I actually had a pretty good time on The View. And halfway through that interview, Rosie Perez, one of their hosts, said to me, you know, I'm not a Republican, Carly. I said, well, I'm shocked, Rosie. I never And she then asked me in that tone, because she kind of liked me, I think, why are you a conservative? And I said, because I know that no one of us is any better than any other one of us. Every one of us has God-given gifts. Every one of us wants to and has the capacity to live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. And I know that our values, our principles, and our policies work better to lift people up. That is a fight we have to have, ladies and gentlemen, because progressives don't believe that. They believe that some are smarter than others, some are better than others, some are going to take care of others because some people can't live good lives. It is the height of disrespect and disregard. I am not prepared to manage the decline of a great nation, but with your help, I will lead the resurgence of a great nation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, someone wanted a picture in the book before me. Here's the picture. And the book, the picture. Someone
That's right.
Did someone have a book and pictures, right? All right, okay. Great, thank you.
He's coming, he's coming.
Here? Can we have a picture?
Yeah, let's look here, guys.
All right, and then
Charlotte, turn around.
What's that?
Come here, guys. There you go. Awesome. All
What's that book
All
called?
right. Campers.
Harley's foot.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Daddy, you didn't tell us? Do you want me to bring this?
Yeah, turn that
let's
off.
get your book and your
Pen.
Hey, guys.
Davy Bunch, go in the hallway, okay? Good job, guys. Is that better?
It'll cost you copies, but we can have those. This is our company. Oh, our small company. Well, thank you. Let's see, take the picture here.
I will be glad to. On camera or myself. Yeah, there we go. Is it the three of you? There you go, guys.
Okay. Did you guys sign in?
Okay, so it's on. Okay, here we go. Boom. I'll take one with the flash real quick, guys. There we go.
Thank you very much.
Do you want a used photo? Well, it's kind of on a thing where you gotta.
You have it? All right, fantastic.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we
Yeah,
can't
got it.
Use it or else it might blank out.
Otherwise,
You know what I'm saying?
one at a time.
Want a group picture? Would that be easier?